The UseEffect hook is the most important hook in React when it comes to side effects. And in this video, I'll teach you everything that you need to know about the UseEffect hook so that you can confidently use it in your React projects. So you can think of side effects as some form of logic that runs outside the scope of React. Good examples are fetching data from an API, setting time intervals, subscribing to external events, or interacting with the DOM elements directory. So let's dive right in and we'll see some of these examples in this video. So right here, I have this particular application and we will be fetching Rick and Morty characters depending on the ID of the character. So here I have a button that increments the ID by 1. And how do we make use of the UseEffect to fetch the data? The first thing that we need to do is to import UseEffect. So right here, we'll say UseEffect and we import it in a similar way that we import the UseStateHook. And by the way, if you don't know about the UseStateHook, we covered it in the last video. So I'll leave a link at the description section below to it so that you can go watch everything that you need to know about UseStateHook and then you can come back to this video. So the first thing, we import UseEffect normally from React like we did with UseState. And then we use this UseEffect at the top level. So we call it at the top level. Now, when we do like this, UseEffect usually accepts two parameters. The first parameter is a function. So right here, I'll pass an arrow function like that. And then the second parameter is usually an array. And here we call this array a dependency array. Because basically the UseEffect depends on those dependencies to run again. Okay, so how does UseEffect run? It will run for the very first time when our component mounts or when our page renders. Okay, so you can be assured that UseEffect will always run at least once whenever you call it like this with an empty array of dependencies. But when we include some dependencies, UseEffect usually run again whenever those dependencies changes, as we will see in this particular example when fetching the Rick and Morty characters by ID. So let's start right here by performing a fetch request. So I'll just paste some form of code right here, which I already had, and you'll see this code is trying to fetch from Rick and Morty API, and it's fetching a character by character ID. And this character ID right here by default is 1. So we will be fetching a character with an ID of 1. And then right here we get a response. We convert that response which we get here and we log it to the console. Basically, that is a character now in form of an object. So when I go ahead and save this file, and then we can refresh the page, you'll see that when our component first renders or when our page first loads, you'll see that we are able to get the first character by ID because this UseEffect has run. But whenever we change the ID to 2, you'll see nothing happens to our UseEffect. It doesn't run again. So UseEffect will run again whenever we have a list of dependencies here and these dependencies happens to change. So here we can pass the character ID and now this becomes our dependency. So UseEffect will run again whenever this character ID changes. I'll go ahead and save that file and let's refresh again. So first time we get the first character. When ID changes, we are able to get the second character. I click again, the ID changes and we get the third character and so on. Okay, so this is the simplest way and also most common way of making use of the UseEffect hook. You have some logic and then you add some dependencies that will make the UseEffect to run again whenever those dependencies changes. Okay, now there is one last thing about the UseEffect hook, and that is the cleanup function. So we usually add a cleanup function inside these curly brackets at the very end. We usually say return and then we return a function and we call this function a cleanup function. For now, let's just say console .log of cleanup, and I'll happen to save. So how does the code run when we have this particular cleanup function? Whenever our dependencies changes and UseEffect detects a change, what it will do before running this code, it will first perform a cleanup. So it will perform a cleanup, it will run this function to perform a cleanup, and then after that, it will run this code afresh. So if I click here to change the ID, you see it first perform a cleanup and then it runs our code again. When I click again, it perform a cleanup and then it fetches the third character. And this will go on and on and on, and this prevents memory leaks or even unexpected behavior. But what are the use cases which we might need to make use of a cleanup function? Because normally when fetching data, we don't need a cleanup function. So let me show you some examples of situations which we need a cleanup function. So here I have some examples of when you might need to add a cleanup function, and mostly we add this cleanup to avoid unexpected behaviors or even memory leaks. Okay, so the first situation is when we have some kind of an event listener. So for example, here we are adding a resize event listener and performing some logic here when we resize the window, and we need to remove that event listener before we run this code again. Okay, so this is one of the situation where you might need to add a cleanup function. The other situation is when you have some kind of a timer or interval. So this code runs periodically and you need to clear the timer before you set another timer, okay, so that to avoid having multiple timers at the same time. And then we have another situation here when you are subscribed to external services or APIs. So you first unsubscribe before you subscribe again. So that is another situation. And then right here I have a real world example of a cleanup function, and let's see what we have here. This is from one of my courses here on YouTube, which is a man chat application, and here we were using Socket.io to listen to messages, incoming messages and also incoming notification. So this first code here is listening to an incoming message, and then we are updating the message like that. And then this one here is listening to an incoming notification and it's updating the notification accordingly. Now these are some kind of events, okay? So these are some kind of events that we are listening to, and we need to clear the events before we listen to them again. So right here we are passing a cleanup function, or rather we are returning a cleanup function, and we are switching off the socket for get messages, and also we are switching off the socket for get notification before we run this code again, so that to avoid some kind of memory leaks or even unexpected behavior. So these are some of the situations in which you might need to use a cleanup function for smooth functionality. And that is UseEffect. That is all you need to know about our UseEffect. Okay, if you enjoyed the video, please make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.